Welcome into this episode of Wear and Tear, a Bears postgame show. I am joined by Taylor Dahl. She's a member of the Helmets and Heels on 1010XL, covering the Jaguars, and host of Making Monsters here at Second City Gridiron, Windy City Gridiron, all that good stuff. Taylor, how are you doing after that atrocity?
No, that was rough. Yeah, it was not good. And most people that listen to my stuff know I also cover the Jags and they won, but it was like some of the worst football I've watched. So I had 6 hours of terrible football, and that was a waste of my Sunday, technically, but here we are.
It's funny you say that because I'm right there with you because, my week is pretty dang busy with all the physical therapy stuff. And
Yeah.
the fact that I spend 3-ish hours plus then doing this, like, so 4 to 5 hours or so on the Bears, wasting my Sunday
Yeah.
is it's frustrating. But why is it frustrating? We're going to dive into that. The diagnostic study, kind of just general thoughts about what was going on in this game, offense, defense, special teams.
Yeah.
Just what are you thinking here?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of problems, and they all have gotten exposed today, especially. And I think recently we've already seen it. And I think the defense we've seen have so much trouble when it comes to the pass rush, when it comes to stopping the run, that now all of those things are catching up and it's starting to affect things happening in the secondary. And you can see it. And I do think that Jaquan Brisker being missing is a big part of that, because I think when Brisker's on the field, he's all over the place and you see him everywhere. So him not being there kind of sucks. Then obviously Elijah Hicks, who was his original backup's been banged up too. So now you are down to your third string safety. And not saying that's everything, but Andrew Billings being gone is massive. And you've seen how much the run game has struggled with that. And like I said, now I think that that's starting to catch up defensively. But I'm not putting it all on the defense. You can't wait 3 quarters to score. This has been way too many times now that it's looked absolutely terrible through 2 quarters, and then they've been able to hold on enough defensively to where they can catch up a little bit in the second half. But a team like the Niners, they were just they couldn't stop anything they were doing, and so when you can't score until that late, you have no chance.
Yeah, time and time again, we've seen that, early in the year and then a little bit later here, where, like you said, the offense just cannot get going in the first half at all. They find a little bit of something at the end of the first half, moving into the second, the last couple games, and then they make it a game. But when you go down that badly, because the red zone defense today just couldn't stop anybody, right?
No,
And I said this in the pregame show that the 49ers have a team, they have a coach, they have a staff where you can plug and play all these different running backs. It doesn't matter that CMC isn't there. It doesn't matter that Jordan Mason isn't there. I picked up Isaac Guerrero for fantasy this week, knowing that I think he would have a game, and he didn't. He actually got hurt near the very end, and you
yeah,
still had Taylor get 7 rushes for 25 yards, 3.6 average.
yeah,
This team just is built to consistently run the ball well. And you had a great point where when you remove Brisker, you remove Billings, that's a problem in the run game. And like you said, eventually it's going to affect the secondary. I mean, you let George Kittle, who's fantastic, don't
oh
get
yeah.
me wrong. He is an all-pro tight end, 6 catches, 151 yards.
Did they? I mean, I feel like they had no answer for Kittle, and not
No.
even that it wasn't like. And Kittle's a big dude, and he's known for being that guy to be able to run guys over and get those yards after catch. But he was wide open in the middle of the field so many times where I was like, they have no idea what to do against George Kittle.
And I think inherently a lot of that boils down to what my problem is with the construction of this defense. And I don't think it matters if you remove Eberflus and, right, you have a different defensive coordinator at this point. The bare bones, no pun intended, of that's even on the ratio. I got to change the background. I forgot about that. Of what this defense is, it offends me as a football fan and watcher, just because it's the soft zones.
Yep.
One of my things is Tremaine Edmonds. What are you here for? What do you do?
Yeah.
Because in theory, right, you want this big, lanky, long defender to be able to take away some of these passing lanes in zone. But as we just mentioned with Kittle, we saw it a couple plays in the red zone with Jennings and what he was able to do, that they're just able to pick apart this defense.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was honestly the strong suit of the Bears all year, was that red zone defense. So it was something that I think the Niners knew exactly how to take away their biggest strength of the season. And that has been it. Teams have kind of been able to do whatever they want on the football field, even offensively, until they get into the red zone. And then the Bears have been able to at least hold them to field goals, or maybe early let them score and figure it out in the second half. And today there was just nothing. There was no answer to anything. There was no answer to Juwan Jennings. There was no answer to Kittle. There was no answer to any of the running backs that were out there. And by the way, we're already on the third string running back, and you still didn't. But to your point, that's a Kyle Shanahan offense, and he's one of those guys that you can plug and play these guys because he schemes things so well, and it is built for success in that. And they're also beat up on offensive line, and they're still able to run the ball, and that's something that we do, I think, have to shift over when we're talking about the struggles offensively for the Bears. Yeah, like Caleb Williams, there was some things early, like maybe some misses on him. We saw an early drop by DJ Moore. We saw an early drop by Keenan Allen, but also we just haven't been able to run the ball very well lately either. It kind of is going back to what we saw those first 3 weeks. And when you're not getting that ground game going, it really puts a lot on Caleb, and we're just not there yet.
I mean, that's a good shift to focus a little bit on what's going on with this offense. We saw that again in the last couple of weeks. It's been better. It really has been. However, this game really, I think, highlighted some of the problems that are still there. I talked about in the preview show how DeAndre Swift is still last in the league in rushing yards over expected. And that's not just hey, that was a previous thing and he's gotten better. He has the home run ability, but there's too many times where it's a 1 yard gain, a negative 2 yard gain because he tries to bounce it. And when you're playing behind the sticks like that, now all of a sudden that puts a lot of pressure, like you said, on Caleb. The sacks are still a problem. Part of that's on Caleb. Part of it, again, I think it's on the scheme. And right now, I got to see the all 22 from this game. But from previous games, you're still seeing receivers just not really open.
Yeah. Yeah, we saw it a few times. The announcers, I think 2 or 3 times even said like there was nowhere really for Caleb to go, and the announcer was like, "Hey, at some point we're gonna have to see him try and like push things into tight windows." And we know Caleb can do that, but you also know he's been trying to avoid some of those mistakes, which he was on that streak until the fumble today of not turning the ball over. And so I think that it is, you need these wide receivers to start getting open. You need to figure out some of these things when it comes to all of the talent. You have too many guys that do have a lot of ability and a lot of talent on the teams. I just feel like we don't utilize them the way that you're supposed to. And I do think Thomas Brown has done a better job because we saw the last 3 weeks, you saw them using Keenan in he's a magician when it comes to route running. That's where you kind of focus on the Keenan Allen stuff. You know that Rome Odunze, we saw today the ability of Rome. I want to see way more Rome Odunze because you can clearly tell him and Caleb have something once they start going. But yeah, I think the run game's a big part. And I do think that some of it is Swift, but I do also think that this offensive line is just, it's not good. It's Braxton got work today constantly. He was getting pushed back into Caleb constantly. The interior we know has been kind of a mess. Coleman Shelton's been the main piece that's been decent, and like that's just all right. And so when it comes to the interior, I mean, but it's just there's so many things now that we're looking at going into this offseason where you're like, the trenches are a massive part. You've got to figure out offensive line and defensive line, or it's going to be a really long season next year too.
Yeah, I know I'm curious in your perspective on this because a lot of people, especially after this game, I'm now looking at the Bears Twitterverse, are calling, hey, Matt Eberflus is gone, and you had this as a result, right? Losing 38-13 against a 49ers team that was supposed to be emotionally sapped and clearly was physically limited just because of who they didn't have on the field, but they found a way to just blow you out. Now, if you don't have that excuse, and if Caleb is a rookie and you can't necessarily blame the quarterback, you look to Ryan Poles. What is your view on Ryan Poles in terms of how he's constructed this roster, and should he continue to be the one going forward?
Yeah, so I've defended Ryan Poles a lot, and I'm going to continue to do that. And maybe that will change. Like, I'm one person who will be the first one to admit when I'm wrong looking back at certain situations. I will say that I defended Matt Eberflus a lot this past year, and the reason I did is because I do think he is a defensive genius when it comes to certain things. And we saw it end of game problems, and that comes to play calling defensively, it comes to timeouts and time management and all of those things. But when it comes to being able to figure out offenses, I loved what Eberflus was able to do, and you did see that the last few weeks of what he was able to do against a lot of high powered offenses, ones that score a ton. And you kind of saw that catch up a little bit today. I'm not mad that they fired Eberflus. I do think it was the right choice. But when it comes to Ryan Poles, I think that at the overall picture, I mean, he gave you he got you DJ Moore and a ton of draft picks. He got you Keenan Allen for a fourth round, and the Keenan Allen who maybe some people thought he was going to do way more this year. And I think some of it is just the stagnant that we've seen of the offense as a whole. But Keenan Allen has still been the player that you think he can, especially a year 12 player. But the biggest thing always for me was that Keenan Allen is a teacher, and he's one of those guys that are going to mold a guy like Roma Dunze into a player that is going to be successful long term in the NFL. I love that move. I think that there's been a lot of things that he's done really good when it comes to even bigger picture, when it comes to caps, dead cap, and what he's done after he took over. And Ryan Pace made that a hot disaster when it came to all the guys hitting free agency, all the money that the Bears owed all these players. They were like still, I think maybe still paying Leonard Floyd. Like it was insane how much time over that Ryan Pace was still paying these guys that weren't on the team anymore. Ryan Poles has done all of these things to limit that. You have money, you're starting to get your draft picks back. You do have talent, I think, on both sides of the ball. Has there been some misses? I think so. To me, I think people focus a lot on the trenches, which I understand. He's an offensive lineman, he's a former offensive lineman. You think like that would be the main focus because that's how Detroit did it. Detroit built from the trenches out, and look what they've been able to accomplish in that time. But I do think that this offseason, give it to Ryan Poles, and it will be heavy trenches. And you are looking at him signing offensive linemen or drafting offensive linemen and defensive linemen. And then maybe in a year, we're talking about it a little different. But it's hard for me to not look at Ryan Poles and look what he did with the cap space when it's come to draft picks and look at DJs and Keenans and Romes and even when it comes to Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker and Javon Dexter, and I can keep going on the list of guys that he's drafted that I've really liked and I see talent, and I think we're just seeing the start of it. So it's hard for me to give up on Ryan Poles already. Now, if we go into next year and there's like one offensive lineman signed and maybe like one pass rusher, I'll be furious, and that'll be when I will start questioning it.
Yeah, I don't know that I can say that I share your sentiments on Matt Eberflus part of it all. But I definitely share your sentiments when it comes to the Ryan Poles sentiment. Just because I think when you look at it in totality, yes, the trenches are a problem, but people like to act like he's ignored it in its entirety.
Yeah.
You're sitting there and you think about it. You have at left guard, you have Tevin Jenkins, which is a holder from the last regime. And I mean, I'm personally someone who thinks that when Tevin is healthy and on the field, he is one of the better guards out there. He did go out and sign Nate Davis, who was, when he's with the Titans, when he was playing, he was good. But, you know, there was the availability question. And then, of course, apparently Vrabel hated him. Absolutely. So you have to factor that in. But he did go to address it. He drafted a tackle in the top 10. Braxton Jones was, yes, only a fifth-round investment. But he was good enough in the last little couple of years that you're not going to just straight up replace that, nor did you necessarily have draft capital to do so. So, you know, I think overall there has been investment. It's just isn't necessarily enough bites at the apple. However, you factor in that, you know, when you're a good GM, at least in my opinion, you try to collaborate with your head coach in terms of the players that are out there. And you look at some of those early picks, right? You know, people were pounding the table for a receiver. It's not the receiver you want. It was Velus Jones. But, you know, imagine if they drafted a center with that Velus Jones pick, what would have gone on? You went and got, you know, in my opinion, Javon Dexter at least solid right now. You invested in the defense, 2 picks, second-round picks on that defensive line. You went out and got, you know, Kyler Gordon. You went and got Jaquan Brisker in that first draft. So, like, part of it is also, yes, you were putting some of those resources at positions that you definitely needed, and probably was a nod to your head coach of Matt Eberflus, who wants to form that defense. You know, you can't have it both ways. It's tough for me with that. And there's enough good stuff, all the things that you mentioned, that I'm going to wait and circle this offseason and say, okay, prove us right, prove us wrong, see what happens there.
Yeah, because I think you also point to contracts and you look at what he did, a Cole Kmet contract, a Jalen Johnson contract, a DJ Moore contract. Some of these things you also have to focus on. And I think that one stat that I always go back to, because I actually started making monsters that first season of Ryan Poles. So I was really in depth of going into the roster and how much roster turnover there was and all of that stuff. The Bears had 65% of their roster hit free agency that year. And he had like $12 million and 5 picks, no first round. Like that is what Ryan Poles was given the first year he was in Chicago. And I know people are going to be like, okay, well, it's been 3 years now. There were so many holes, not to mention you trying to figure out if the quarterback you have is the quarterback that you needed. But there were so many issues, and as I mentioned, Ryan Pace dug them in such a hole too that they didn't even have money to spend. I mean, he was trying to like throw just darts at a dartboard that first year, trying to figure out what to do, and that's why you ended up with guys like Byron Pringle and Equinemius St. Brown, because we were broke. They had no money because of what Ryan Pace did, and I think that those things that people get mad about Khalil Mack. I would love having Khalil Mack on the Bears, but what Ryan Poles was doing was looking long term, and I think that that's what a lot of Bears fans I think don't realize, because Ryan Pace was such a big, like, okay, we're gonna go sign Khalil Mack. Let's get this like big name signing that everybody's gonna be obsessed with and you're gonna love it. And he did like one or two of those a year. So everyone thought, like, oh, this is good because he makes these big moves. But then you were screwed 2 years later because you were in such a
Right.
contract hole that you had nothing to do. You couldn't do anything. And so Ryan Poles is this guy that plans for beyond this year. And I know he spoke big words when it was like, we're gonna take the North back and not give it up, and it's of course you're going to say that because it's been a long time since you've been able to do that, but I also think at the same time he's one of these guys that he's not looking at right now, and I know a lot of Bears fans want that because we've been watching them lose for a long, long time. Ryan Poles has been watching them lose for 3 years, and he feels like he's developing a product that will be able to win the next 10 years. You just have to get those final little pieces in, which I do genuinely think is probably for two offensive linemen, two defensive linemen, and you're already in the works for seeing a changed product.
Those are really good points. All right, we're going to take a quick break here, and then we're going to get in some of our categories. Underdog is a place to play if you're a sports fan looking to win money while watching sports. With over 5 million happy players and $2 billion won, Underdog makes it fun and easy to cash in on all your favorite athletes' performances. Compete against other players just by selecting higher or lower on 2 or more player stats, and you could win up to 1,000 times your money. So turn every touchdown into a win with Underdog. I've used multiple sites and apps to enhance my game day, and Underdog is quite unique. Something pretty cool is their vulture protection. If you select a designated running back to score a touchdown in your pick'em entry and they get vultured, Underdog will rescue your entry. Red Zone Rush is another mode, a game you won't find anywhere else. Just pick whether or not a player will score a touchdown by swiping right for yes and left for no. Simple as that. Plus, your entry will automatically boosted, and you'll get a 51% profit boost when you play. This season, Underdog is going to be running a special, promo, or bonus almost every single day, like profit boosts, discounts, free picks. Free picks are basically a sure thing. A player has to just get higher than, let's say, 0.5 passing yards for that selection to win. Plus, all new users get a free pick. Download the app today and use code CITY, C-I-T-Y, to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Every player, every hair-raising touchdown, just like higher or lower on Underdog. Must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama, Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.nzpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT STEP to 33442. New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. I think that's the cleanest I've ever done that, Reed. Jeez. All right, first category. So as we thought and not. Something that we expected to happen that did, and something that we were a bit surprised by. Sorry for all the puns. That's just how I roll.
I love it.
So what was something that happened in this game that you expected?
Okay. Something that happened. I will say that I expected it to take a bit for the Bears offense to start going, but I was expecting a couple passing touchdowns from Caleb Williams. And I think that we've seen him get better and better throughout the season, more comfortable. You see him, the sacks get frustrating sometimes. You do feel like he holds the ball at certain times too long, but you've also seen some really good things out of him the last few weeks. And so I genuinely was coming into this game. I didn't think you'd be in such a deficit at half that it would be the way it was. But this offense, for some reason, takes so long to get going. And I also want to go back for a second and two and be like, they're on their third offensive coordinator in one season at this point, and your Eric Washington's calling defensive plays for the first time. So it was probably a little bold of some people to think it was going to be better than it was. Maybe not that bad, but yeah, to me, I do think that I'm not surprised that Caleb kind of started going late. I what was the final number? 17 for 23.
17 for 23, 134 yards, 2 touchdowns for a passer rating of 116.9.
So just imagine if like you do that starting at the beginning of the actual game. Like you're looking at a 250-yard game with 3, 4 touchdowns and completing 60 something, 64 or 5% of your passes. They've got to figure out a way to get it going early. And I know we're at the end of the year now. It's kind of like it feels like a lost cause at this point. But I do feel like once he gets heated up and gets going and gets a couple completions, he feeds off of that so much that you see a lot of really good stuff out of him from then. So I guess that's the one thing that I'm not surprised about is that once Caleb started going, you started seeing some really good things out of him.
Like you said, it's just so frustrating that it takes so long. I mean, in this
Yeah.
game, your drives in the first half were 3 plays, 5 plays, 3 plays, 3 plays, 3 plays.
Yeah.
Like
They kept
there's no feel.
yeah. They kept showing that number where it was like Bears have like 2 yards and the Niners have like 300 and something yards. And I was like, Lord, this is embarrassing. It's truly embarrassing to look at that number and the amount of times it flashes up. And when you have more punts than total yards, like that is something that you definitely like it can't keep taking 3 quarters to get going.
My as I thought was more along. I already mentioned this a bit, but the lack of rush defense. We talked on this. So I don't have to do a whole thing, but San Francisco had 131 yards on the ground. Guerrero 15 attempts for 78 yards. He averaged 5.2 yards a carry. And then Taylor had some. Samuel had some. Just filtering those in there. You're not going to be able to win a game if that's the baseline rushing you're allowing. Then that's not even considering the fact that the Bears allowed 321 passing yards. But this has to be something that gets shored up in the offseason. Obviously, getting Billings back, Brisker back, we talked about that. But truly also just a shift in the mentality and probably scheme of what this defense looks like.
Yeah, it is frustrating to watch. This whole year I feel like the run defense has been a liability. A lot of times, like when Billings was in there, it did feel better, but it still felt like teams, every time I would do a Making Monsters, because obviously I do the previews for them also on Fridays. Every time I would talk to an opposing team, I'd be like, well, like we'll be able to run the ball. And they're like, no, we haven't been able to run the ball all year. I promise you'll be able to run the ball against us because for some reason I had the conversation with the Colts. The Colts guys swore up and down there's no way that they were going to be able to run the ball because Jonathan Taylor hasn't been able to get going all year. He went off on us. When I was talking to the guy in Washington, he was talking about how they were having troubles getting the ball going on the ground. When I was talking to the guy in Arizona, they were talking about they were having trouble. And every single team ran all over the Bears. So I agree with you. That is going to have to be. And that's when I go back to the trenches, trenches, trenches. That is a part of it because you have to. This league this year is like a decade high in rushing when it comes across the board of yards, touchdowns, everything. Like the run game is back in full effect and you have to be able to stop it.
100%. All right. Something that we were both surprised by. Mine was that there was absolutely no dead cat bounce, no Thomas Brown effects, and there's no energy in this game. We saw it from the beginning, and I also was surprised with how energetic the 49ers came out. I mean, yes, they are still very much in the playoff race. I think it's 6% chance before the game really started, but that division is still close that they absolutely have a shot there. However, I mean, they just came out guns a-blazing from the beginning. Obviously, you're home, which helps, but that it shouldn't. They have so much going on between emotional stuff with unfortunate things going on with Trent Williams and his family, and what's going on with Travarius Ward and his family, the loss of all these players who we've already talked about. That I was surprised. There's also the weirdness going on with people say, "Well, Kyle Shanahan we moved on from yada yada." That I thought they'd be down, and the fact that Thomas Brown really nothing translated, that was frustrating. I also was someone who, if you listen to the post-game show I did for the Lions, I mentioned that, and this is before Eberflus got fired, I didn't want Thomas Brown to become head coach. Mm-hmm. Nothing against him. My concern was now having to move 2 positions up, having to deal with all of that while still trying to develop Caleb. And you did see that this offense really did struggle there. I mean, you scored 13 points.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. I had a lot of people asking me this past week, like anytime I'd put my list of who I would like as a head coach, the next head coach, and people would be like, what about Thomas Brown? I'm like, I need to see more. Oh, you see coaches all the time who are good coordinators. And then once they have that role of having to do all of it, they don't know how to balance all of that. So I'm with you in that light. And I think that when you're going back, it's just that honestly surprised me too, because you felt like all week guys like Jalen Johnson and several guys on the team were all like, okay, well, the coach is gone, it feels like we can breathe and it feels like we feel free and and you just didn't feel any of that, especially in the first half whatsoever. So I agree on that. I will say the thing that surprised me the most was how good they let Brock Purdy look. I'm not one of those people that think Brock Purdy's a bad quarterback, but I do think when you don't even have a guy like Brandon Ayuk out there and you are deep down in the depth chart on the run game and you're still able to just pretty much throw to wherever and whoever you want to. And yeah, we mentioned a lot of that was George Kittle. And first of all, rude, George. We thought you were a Bears fan. But I think that when you go to that and you start talking about some of those type of things of what they were able to let Brock do, and just got to him a couple times, but you know, like he was even his shoulder was hurting at one point. He left and came back, and it still looked like nothing affected him whatsoever. And I did think that we'd see at least a little bit of something out of that, especially with our secondary when you have a guy like Jalen Johnson and you have what you thought were pieces to at least contain it a little bit, and they just couldn't contain anything.
So let's try to put a positive spin on this somehow. It's going to be a good day. What is something positive you would take from this game moving forward for whether it's this season or going into next season even?
Yeah, I'm gonna say Rome Odunze, which if anybody listens to my stuff, I love Rome. I shouted for Rome during the draft. I've been telling for weeks, like, give me more Rome Odunze. But that toe tap in the corner, even the announcers were like, hold on, did he get it? I was like, oh, he got it. Like he made sure those 2 feet were down before he went out of bounds. And that's just awareness. You're a rookie, and to have that awareness and that quick of a play on just the very border of the end zone. I think that it's really fun to see that. Obviously, both touchdowns being between those two, and I think we're just seeing Rome grow as a player, as a person. You're seeing him go to the sidelines and he's talking to people, like trying to, like go over the plays of what happened, what didn't happen, what the issues were. And he was talking to the refs at one point, trying to understand what one of the calls were. I just love that out of them because you can tell he's a learner and he wants to be the best he possibly can. And because of that, he definitely takes in everything. He takes in every moment that he's out there, and that's just so. I'm going to go with Rome because I do think Rome is our wide receiver of the future, anyways.
I think that really has to be the main bright spot that you're going to point to with this, just because of, I mean, he hasn't really been a focal point in any particular game, and this is the closest that would be with 4 receptions, 42 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He still seems to not line up in the right place all the time, which needs to get worked on. Yeah. But, at the end of the day, if there's going to be 2 players on this team going forward that we know are going to be here and are going to be the cornerstone of what this looks like, it's got to be Caleb and Rome. Yeah. Just to give something slightly different, I'll say for me, something positive was the shift in the second half with Jalen Johnson, where you ended up seeing, okay, we're going to now throw you on Jawan Jennings because we're over this. And he was able to slow down what was happening when you put him one-on-one. Yeah. It just is ridiculous it took that long to do that. But, Jalen is still a dude at corner, and that's something that you can use. And obviously with the contract you mentioned earlier, he's going to be here for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I agree. I love Jalen. I was ecstatic when it came to the contract. I think he's also one of those guys that you want that dog type of mentality. And Jalen has that when it comes to, we heard the stories about him being the one who kind of flipped out when it came to the Eberflus stuff. And sometimes you need that guy to be the vocal guy on and off the field. And so it's good to have Jalen in that light. But yes, I agree. It took Eric Washington too long to figure out, like, hey, we need to adjust something, like put your best player where he can make the best plays. So it was fun to kind of see that. And there were a few moments defensively, even the score wouldn't tell you, but there were a few moments defensively where TJ Edwards, I maybe would probably, if I was naming another positive, TJ Edwards had a good game. I felt like Jack Sanborn looked a little lost today. There was multiple times where I was like, what was he trying to do on that play? But we're talking positive here. So I do think that Jalen's just somebody that you want back there. And I'm starting to get concerned about Tyreek at this point. So I think we might be looking for someone opposite of Jalen, because you do want to help him out. But when he's just so good, especially when you just let him have a guy and be like, cover this guy. Not many people can do anything against him.
Concussed corner. This is something in the game that was so odd. The decision maker must have been concussed. I think for me, I just can't get behind that throw by Caleb with 2:40 left in third quarter that was initially ruled an incomplete pass and then became a fumble. For me, the difference between an arm coming forward versus decelerating, coming backward, and being dropped is so paper thin. Now, if you want to make the argument that it was a backwards pass, which would have been a fumble, I can get behind that. But that was kind of more what they leaned on later. Yeah. And also just the fact that the replay assist ended up changing the call to be ruled a fumble, so there wasn't a challenge needed. I just thought the whole thing was a little funky. Yes, ultimately it really was a fumble. It was a
Yeah.
turnover, but the methodology and how they got there was funky for me.
Yeah, that was weird. And I feel like everybody was confused in that moment because even when you're listening to the game broadcast, they were all like, I don't really see it. And then they're like, oh, they did, but they did shift to it was a backwards. Like they quickly were like, oh, maybe because it was backwards. So it was kind of funky and odd. But I do think that we see at least one of those every game, I feel like from Caleb, where it's a kind of like, what was that moment? And I think those will start getting shaken out. Like he's one of those guys that just always wants to make a play. And so I think that sometimes he tries to force some things or he tries to do a little too much. And that's when he holds the ball too long and things like that. I do think some of those will start to balance out because once you have protection and you're not having to worry about someone around you all the time. But yeah, let's see what concussed for me. I mean, there's a lot of moments where I was like, what what is going on in this? I feel like, and I get it. I think a part of it, Roshan not playing today also affected it because
Yeah.
some of the times where I felt like it would have been Roshan running the ball in certain situations and just like and right into the offensive lineman's back, that just doesn't work for DeAndre Swift. So I feel like, but there was a few of those play calls where I was like, Thomas Brown, like I thought we got away from this, and I also thought we had transformed into what works for Caleb so far, which is like a more quick up tempo, get the ball out quick, like that type of thing. And it just wasn't there at all in the first half. So I guess I would say that's kind of my thing is just the especially first half play calling when it came to some of the things that they were asking Swift to do, but then also just some of the thing like not having that quick fast paced what Caleb likes. Like you can tell Caleb loves being in that type of offense. And so we just didn't really see much of that in the beginning. So I guess that would be my what was happening.
I think that's a really good one. Actually, like that was going to be into my next section, which I'll just like blend into that because I wanted to see for my here for moral support and area to work on. I just thought that the tempo wasn't there most of the game. They shifted in that one drive where they did, the first drive in the second half, excuse me, where they did score. But also there seemed like a big decrease in motion.
Yep.
There we saw a lot more of it in the last couple of weeks in a very functional motion, right? Not
Yep.
just hey, we're moving a guy just to see what the coverage is, but having DJ Moore go in motion so that he's hitting his route at full sprint, having motion so that you're changing leverage points on certain blocks, and you're not really seeing that in this game at all. Combining that with the tempo issues, it felt very static. There weren't really a lot of moments where they moved the pocket, things of that nature. There was a lot of straight drop back when they were going to pass, and then again, just when you look down the field, I think they've almost continued. What I think is that you can see that now when you remove Eberflus, Caleb is not being as aggressive as I would hope or think he would be. I mean, he
Yeah.
only had 6 incompletions, yet you're getting 3.1 yards average gain on most of your plays.
Yeah.
You're not attacking, you're not willing to throw it into tighter windows, mistrust with his receivers. We know there's a
Yeah.
bit of a lack of separation, but you're at the point where, I mean, you got to rip it, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's something early in the first like even 6, 7, 8 weeks, I was totally fine with it because I was like, we know Caleb can do these deep balls, like crazy plays with everything you need downfield. I was more concerned about the structure side of things and about those intermediate midfield, those type of passes. But I think now we've seen he's able to do those. So I would like to see a little bit more downfield stuff, especially when you have a Roma Dunze and a DJ Moore. So I think I'm going to tie it in too when it comes to that also of where is Cole Komet and all of this because it's just I feel like you need to be using Cole Komet the way that they were using George Kittle today because Cole Komet is that type of dude who can run people over, and we saw him drop one. But Cole usually doesn't drop. He has one of the highest catch percentages in the league. So I don't know why you're not getting the targets to him or finding ways to fit him into this scheme because another guy you just gave a contract to, and every other team in the NFL is using their tight ends in that way. And you have one of the better ones, and you're not factoring him into it at all. So that is probably for me one of the things that I'd like to see them work on moving forward is just getting Cole Komet involved in any way. And I know some of it, your tight ends are doing other things, they're blocking and whatever, and we've seen Cole slowly start getting a little bit better at that blocking ability too. But I just want to see some of those midfield stuff with Cole because he is that guy who will make those big catches when you need to and also get those extra yards out of it.
Yeah, I know some people are gonna go to and circle that 2 point conversion, the play he dropped there, and
Yeah,
like you said, he honestly he's in the top 5 right now in terms of
yeah,
catch percentage coming into this game, just because of the size, what he can do, and he's one of the guys that creates some separation because of that physicality that he has. Besides the drop there and the 2 point conversion, he had no targets this
yeah,
game, and that's just very odd to me that you wouldn't have at least a small grouping of plays that
yeah,
you specifically have him be the first read or even the second read. It's to me, it seems consistently he is the third or fourth in any progression. And as of right now, with how where Caleb is at, unfortunately, with rolling through some of these, hanging on a little too long, and there's some weird footwork that he's been going on, a couple too many hitches. He's just
yeah.
not getting there. So I agree. I think not having Cole involved and no, he's not George Kittle, but he's
Yeah, and
more
I'm
than
not
what you're
saying he's a
using him.
Kittle, but yeah,
Right.
yeah,
There are too many people that say they circle and they say he's not George Kittle, he's not Travis Kelsey, and it's like,
Kelsey or
good,
whatever.
who
Yeah,
cares? That's not what he
yeah,
needs to be. But he's a top 10 tight end, or
yeah.
so at least use him in that fashion.
Yeah, get him more than one target. Like, I don't understand. And we had that stretch of time where everyone was mad about Waldron for that because he had 2 targets in 3 games, and everyone was like, "What is going on?" And then you felt like he was getting a little bit more involved in those 3 division opponent games, and then now it went right back to what we were seeing before. So that's something that I definitely want to see them work on.
Exactly. All right, last break here, and then we're going to get into the back end of the show. What's important? Stats. This is just a stat from the game that you felt was really important to the outcome. What do you got?
I think the one I mentioned earlier that in the first half, when you go into halftime and there's 317 total yards to 2 yards, you're not going to win football games that way. Fast starts. I think that is something, and I'm not even asking you to score a touchdown on the first drive. Like, that'd be asking a lot right now from this team. But something like get some sort of momentum going a little bit when it comes to getting some at least past the 50-yard line on your first drive, just to make the opposing defense a little bit tired. But that number was astounding to me, and I think that the announcer said another one during too, where they were saying that it was the first time that the like total differential had been that big. They said all year, but I'm like, it had to have been more like ever because I'm like 300 yards to 2 is absolutely insane.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that Bears yardage at the end of the first half was their fewest in a first half this millennium per True Media Sports. Just some other ones from that first half. Time possession, 49ers 20 minutes, Bears 10 minutes. First downs, 49ers 14, Bears 1. Yards per play, 49ers 8.6, Bears 0.2. Sacks, 49ers 4, Bears 1. Punts, 49ers 1, Bears 5. Passer rating, 155.8 for Purdy, and Caleb had a 70.1. It's the tale of the two halves. It got a
Yep.
little better in the second, but you
Yeah.
cannot start that poor. I mean, the only thing really that you could talk about is a positive in that first half was, I mean, Torrey Taylor looked good.
Yeah. You're like, he had a 60-yard punt. Like, that's good.
Yeah, he had a 58 and then a 60-yarder. Didn't
Yeah.
outkick his coverage. Great. Ooh, we had 2 inside the 20. Love it.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, and I think that that's what is most deflating in this because there was nothing really that you're taking out of that first half that you felt was good. I mean, honestly, like the best thing that would happen was when the Niners would get a penalty and you're like, "Oh, yay, like they're going backwards 10 yards." Like that they helped us a little bit, or when they messed up their kick and they didn't get it in the landing zone and so we get it on the 40. I was like, oh, "Okay, well, we get the ball on the 40." And that is what you're celebrating in those moments, and that's not ideal.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to celebrate something, you can talk about how the Bears only had 2 penalties, right? So that's something that was better
Oh,
than the last 13 weeks.
that's honestly kind of crazy. Like it felt like there was more, but I mean, I guess good job.
I guess. Kombucha peak performance moments. Kombucha is a premium performance-focused kombucha crafted specifically for athletes and active individuals. This revitalizing beverage blends the traditional benefits of kombucha with nutritional enhancements to support energy, hydration, and recovery. Go ahead and use code BEARGUTCHECK, BEARGUTCHECK at kombucha.com in order to get 15% off your order. So, what was your peak performance moment, if you can find any, in this game for the Bears?
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I have to go back to the Rome corner toe tap touchdown. Like I feel like that was the most exciting thing that happened. and I, like I said, just the awareness of that too. We saw, I remember in the preseason when like the end zones were painted wrong and he ended up catching the one and stepped out. And I was like, he'll never do that again. Like he's going to be focused on those end zones so hard moving forward. But I do think, and you mentioned earlier too about he's not always lined up in the right spot. I do also notice some of the routes he runs sometimes are really odd too. So those are
Yeah.
some of the things you want to see him shake out and get a little more comfortable with. But when it comes to the balls actually, when he gets the ball in his hands, the things that he can create with that, when it comes to toe taps, when it comes to some of the things after catch, when it comes to like juking people out a little bit, you'll see some of that from him. So to me, I feel like that was probably the best moment in the game, is just seeing that connection with him in the corner.
I had the exact same one written down, that third down the red zone, for the exact same reasons, right? The fact that in the preseason he was out of bounds with oddly painted lines, but still
Yeah, it
he was
was
out
so
of
weird.
bounds. But at this point in time, there's a few things that really matter going forward these next 4 games. One of them is, can Rome become your true, in my opinion, wide receiver one? No offense to DJ, that's just not who he is. He's
Yeah,
a wide receiver two that can have some one moments.
yeah,
And you just see for various teams how important that is. Apparently, you don't need that if you're the 49ers. You just need George Kittle and Jelon
yeah,
Jennings. But I think for the Bears to really operate how they all need to, they're going to need Rome to be that dude. And at least that is a moment that if you can like build on that, you're feeling decent.
yeah, yeah. I agree.
Masseter player of the game, aka MVP. The masseter can close the teeth with a force of up to 55 pounds in the incisors and 200 pounds in the molars. Pretty important for doing things fun like eating, drinking, talking, doing this podcast. So, pretty important muscle. Do you have someone that you can make the MVP?
I know. I was about to say, I guess I would go Rome again, but just to go different because it's been a lot of Rome. I will say TJ Edwards. I think TJ Edwards was the one player, especially with whatever Tremaine was doing the entire game. I don't know. Being able to kind of be all over the field. You saw him make several big plays, several big tackles, even like some of the ones that saved plays that probably would have been another like 20 yards if he didn't catch an ankle, and get the guys down before that. And so I think that there wasn't a lot of positive defensively that you could point at all. We talked a little bit about Jalen, but TJ Edwards to me is just someone, especially with what Ryan Poles got him for, that you do have to just give him his credit when it's time, and especially when there's absolutely no other help. Like there was not much pass rush at all. Nobody up at the defensive line was stopping the run. You're doing it without Brisker. Maybe you could say Owens for a late pick. I don't know, but yeah, I'm gonna go TJ Edwards just because I think that he does. He was the only one to me defensively until Jalen a little later that felt like he cared. Honestly, like there were so many guys that I was like, it feels like they're over this, and it's the second quarter.
So yeah, that's a great pick. I mean, he had 6 tackles, 10 combined in total, a sack for 4 yards, 1 QB hit, 2 tackles for loss, pass defended that potentially could have been interception, didn't turn out that way. I mean, he was the only one really that was consistently doing what he needed to do throughout the entirety of that game. Even with his deficiencies, he is not the most athletic, biggest guy out there, especially when you're standing next to Tremaine Edmonds, who has all of the tools in the world and doesn't seem
Yeah,
to just give you what you want. I'm going to recuse myself of selecting an MVP, if I'm being completely honest. This
yeah,
game
I
was
get it.
just, it was trash from beginning to
Yeah,
end. I don't think
I get
anyone
it.
deserved it. In all reality, the MVP was Brock Purdy. The
Yeah,
fact 325 passing yards, 145.4 passer rating, to come off of the snow game that they had against the Bills, to get hit like he did by Darrell Taylor, got bent over backwards, come back in the game. That is, and I've also been someone who's been pretty hypercritical of Brock Purdy, as
yeah,
just ended up in the right place, in the right coach, and the right weapons, but he continues to show that no, I mean, even if you only have Kittle, Jennings, and Garendo, because Samuel didn't do anything today
yeah,
either. I mean, he's really truly the MVP, and there's just really no one on the Bears that deserve even a nod. Maybe
yeah,
TJ Edwards, but that's about it.
yeah. Maybe Tori Taylor.
Torrey Taylor, really, I mean, yeah, at least he like were able to do something with the field position battle. All right, prognosis period, the last bit here before we roll out of here. What is your thoughts on this team going forward over the next 4 weeks and then into the offseason?
I mean, I think to your point earlier, the main thing you have to focus on is Caleb Williams' development at this point and hope it doesn't start getting hindered. I feel like he's done a really, really good job this year with everything that has happened with firings and with the offensive line. I think we're on 6 or 7 different formations in front of him when it comes to the different guys that have been in front of him playing because of injuries and because of Nate Davis doing nothing, and because of all of these other situations, and him not feeling like he has regressed, him you still feeling like you're getting him learning things and getting better week to week. Would people like him to be farther than maybe he is? Possibly. But I think when you look at everything that's happened this year, you do have to give him some credit for still. And I heard some stories recently too about some stuff with Shane Waldron about Waldron not going over film with him, and Caleb creating his own film room in his house because nobody, and he was calling outside sources to try and hire somebody to help him go over film because that's how bad it was with Shane Waldron for a few weeks. And stuff like that, knowing that your rookie quarterback was going through that in week 6, 7, 8 of his NFL career, like breaks my heart for him.
Yeah.
But credit to him for being able to do what he's been able to do this last few weeks, especially when it came to that Minnesota and Detroit and Green Bay game, three top 11, 12 defenses, and you're still able to kind of get out there and have your moments where you really shined. So I think that is the biggest thing right now is just looking at Caleb Williams and development and hope it doesn't start regressing at this point, because it's like you're almost there. Just get through this season. Hopefully we get you some protection. Hopefully you have a head coach that's competent. Hopefully you have a play caller who works around your strengths, and hopefully we have a run game that's consistent. But I said it to a friend the other day and I was like, this is exactly why the rumors went around that like Caleb wouldn't want to come to Chicago, because it's a disaster, and you're seeing him get hit over and over and over again. You're seeing him now again, like I said, on his third offensive coordinator, a head coach that was a passing game coordinator 3 weeks ago. Like, it's just a mess. But that was never Caleb. I don't want to say that was Caleb saying that. That was just like the rumblings, because from what I've heard, Caleb was really pumped to go up wherever, and he honestly loved Chicago. But I do think that that to me is the biggest focus, is like just keep him safe. Don't let him get hurt. We don't want to see an injury in the last few weeks. We don't want to see him start to regress. We don't want to see him start getting scared in the pocket. I've seen it with Trevor Lawrence. I've seen him start to have these issues being afraid because he's been hit and injured so many times now in these last 2 seasons. And I don't want Caleb to get to that point this early. So I think to me, that's what I want to see these last 4 weeks, is just Caleb continue to grow and then start to figure out if that connection grows with Rome, even better. I do think that we need to start figuring out defensively across from Jalen. I would like to see way more Terrell Smith. I know he's been banged up off and on all season too, but Tyreek's just been struggling really bad. And so you've got to put something else across from him there. So there's a few things there that I'd like to see. And then, I mean, I don't even know what to say up front anymore. I guess I personally really like Javon Dexter. I feel like Montez Sweat we haven't seen much of at all. Daryl Taylor has his moments, but I don't even know what to ask for there. But I think there are some building blocks that you have that you want to see to continue to develop, and to me, that Caleb Rome is definitely a big one.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up that aspect of Trevor Lawrence, because obviously, as someone who covers the Jaguars like you do, you got to really get a front row seat to how to mess up a quarterback. I have my own thoughts on Trevor Lawrence and where he falls, but I think a big part of that is what happened to him and that lack of development in the plan around him. So yeah, the hope really is that you don't do the same thing with Caleb. Right. And a part of that is the NFL is a narrative driven league. And coming up, you have 2 primetime games, right? You have the Monday night game against the Vikings at Vikings. And then you also have the post Christmas on Netflix Seahawks Bears game, which is going to be 7:15 on December 26th. Those 2 games in particular, that's where you can potentially help your national narrative in terms of what you have left on this team currently. And then even more importantly, you have that Lions Bears game where you may be the person that you want to bring in as a potential head coach hire. He outlined what he wants in terms of an organization that he'd move into, right? In terms of stability, in terms of, having a quarterback there, things of that nature. So I think those games are important for the narrative sake, so that when you are looking for a head coach, whether it isn't potentially Ben Johnson, whether it's, you can obviously go down the list of all the potential candidates there, but that you have something to offer them and say, hey, look at this, look what we did. I know we sucked, and I know we only won at this point, maybe 4 games, and you can hopefully go to Caleb and say, imagine what you can do with Caleb Williams when you're, whether it's yourself or someone you're bringing in, competently can continue his development. So looking ahead, those primetime games just for the national narrative, and then of course you're kind of hopefully wooing a certain someone across the Detroit sideline on that December 22nd game.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point actually, because it is this, as much as people have been talking about like this is Thomas Brown's kind of interview of what happens after, it also is showcasing what you have and whatever coach is next, it has to work with. Because yes, you'll have money to spend and you'll have draft picks, but for the most part, this is the quarterback you're going to have. These are the wide receivers. Like you're going to have DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, Roma Dunze. We'll see about Keenan, but those guys will be here. DeAndre Swift is going to be here defensively when it comes to Jalen and Kyler, TJ. Like those guys are going to be here. So you do have a solid group of guys where you can showcase them and say, look, I know like things have been a hot mess, but you can help this. We have foundation. We just need somebody to help actually build it and mold it into something that's functional.
All right, I think this is the last time I'm going to have you on before a head coach decision would be made. So I got to ask you the question. Imagine you are GM, Taylor Dahl. You're sitting there, and Kevin Warren actually lets you do what you want. You do your job. Who knows what's going on there? With what you know, because the biggest thing are the interviews. We don't get to be in those, but whatever.
Yeah.
Who would you hire as the Bears head coach?
Yeah, so I think the big one that everyone's talking about, who you were just also kind of mentioning, is Ben Johnson. That's the big one everyone's talking about. I have heard some things from Detroit people that they don't know if Ben Johnson would be a good head coach. He's kind of a nerd. He loves his drawing up plays and offensive things like that, and they don't know how well that will transfer to being a head coach. I've heard comparisons a little bit to Mike McDaniel, and so some people will be like, "Oh, well, Mike McDaniel's great." But the Dolphins haven't won a playoff game, and you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and your defense was really good a couple years ago. It kind of started falling apart recently, but you do also see what their life is like with and without Tua. So if you want a Mike McDaniel, that's the comparison I'm hearing. I think that if you want that guy who knows how to hit the easy button for his quarterback, who knows how to scheme up things, who knows how to change when an offense isn't working, he is really good at shifting and kind of making it work for Tua or whoever is in quarterback. So we'll see. That's just rumblings. You never
Sure,
know.
yeah.
We haven't seen him as a head coach, so whatever. But I still would put Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson's at the top of my list. But there's 3 names for me that I definitely want them to interview at this point, and I'll probably add more, and some may be taken away. But for me, it's definitely Ben Johnson, Liam Cohen, and Todd Monken are my top 3 at this moment of who I'd want. I know people were yelling at me on Twitter the other day. They want a Vrabel. I think Vrabel is a fantastic leader, and I feel like we've seen his head coaching ability. I also, working for the Jags, have talked to a lot of Titans people, and they wanted that man gone so fast when it was time, and that worries me because it was the same exact thing that happened to Doug Peterson. And now
Sure.
you're kind of seeing the same correlations of people are like, why did they get rid of Doug Peterson? He won a Super Bowl a couple years ago. And now you're seeing why. There's definitely things that start to show after a year or two with Doug. And I'm afraid that Vrabel's the same way, because that's kind of some of the things I've heard. I also personally don't want a defensive head coach. And it's not because I'm like, oh, I want someone who like only is going to worry about Caleb and whatever. It's not that. I just don't want to get a defensive head coach. We get an offensive coordinator, and 2-3 years this offensive coordinator is getting hired or getting fired, and then you're on another one. You're on number 4 or 5 for Caleb in his 2nd or 3rd year, and I just don't want to do that again. That's why to me it is important to have an offensive head coach, because offensive minded head coach, because I want this offensive minded head coach to be like, okay, Caleb Williams is mine. I want to be here. Because if an offensive guy comes here, it's because of Caleb Williams. Like, that is why they are coming here. And they are going to want to mold him and make him into the best possible thing. And they'll also, if they're good, be here for a decade or more. And so you don't have to worry about Caleb constantly having this revolving door of guys like trying to develop and learn.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the things you just said there. One of the biggest takeaways I'm having, the more I do this, I'm in this field and doing this job, is it's not about specifically the offensive guy, the defense guy, the this, the that, right? It's about the individual, right, and who they are. And unfortunately, you don't know that unless you're in the interview with them. And also, you don't even know that until you see what they do. So I think the Bears Twitter battle that will happen around these head coaches is going to be both interesting and frustrating at the same time. And at the end of the day, we're just yelling into the clouds because none of us have any clue.
Yeah, and honestly, it's a lot of McCaskey's in this too, because we've heard, and Warren too. We just heard the stuff with Kevin Warren and Jim Harbaugh stuff. But like, I also do feel like we've heard the McCaskies aren't those people to just super spend on people. So it's going to have to, hopefully they shake that a little bit, because it's like, guys, we're not going to win if you keep going this CFL coach, or this guy that maybe was kind of good somewhere for 1 year and never has called plays or done whatever. Like, you have to take some sort of leap and really trust in a person and risk that. I mean, look at even the Broncos, like giving up a pick for Sean Payton and it looking the way it did last year. And then now, this second year, Sean Payton, this being his team, look how much better they look. Like, you have to sometimes take those big risks where maybe at first it doesn't look good, but then let them form their team, let them build their own team, and you see why they are who they are.
All right, that's all we got for you here. Taylor, thank you so much for joining. It's always awesome. It's not super frequently have you on. Got to try to do it more because it's always a pleasure to have you here. Where can people get all your stuff? We mentioned at the beginning, but people need to be listening to you.
Yeah, so my Twitter is at Taydol1010XL. Podcast is Making Monsters. So that one you can hear wherever you listen to your podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all of those. That's obviously Third Second City Gridiron too. I also host a show called Helmets and Heels in Jacksonville. It is Jags based, but we do talk a lot of everything. We have obviously me being a Bears fan, another girl's from Jersey, so she has more of that like Northeast flavor to her, and then one girl born and raised in Jacksonville. But we all live, sleep, eat, breathe football, and a lot of college football, because college football rules the South. So if you want to start hearing some draft talk, like, good time to tune in, because the Jags are already on draft talk. So we're good with that. But yeah, that's called Helmets and Heels. You can hear that on 1010XL, and same thing, stream, podcast, however you want to do that.
All right, that's all we got for you. Thank you, everyone who joins in listening to us live. If you're on the podcast, appreciate you. You should join in for a live show. Throw some questions in the chat. It's always a good interactive. We try to pull questions. We try to answer questions directly as much as we can. There is a light at the end of the tunnel here. Bears fans just got to power through the rest of 2024 and hopefully see some better stuff. Bear down.
Go down.